We will be talking about special education integration for a stronger multi-tiered system of supports. I am Jenna Richard. I am from the American Institutes for Research. I am a senior technical assistance provider, which means in my role, I support bringing research to practice in the field. Primarily, I work in the state of Rhode Island around their state systemic improvement plan to improve outcomes with students in grades K through 8, and specifically math outcomes for students with disabilities.
And I'm Nicole Bucca, and I do technical assistance for the state of Rhode Island for multi-tiered systems of support. I specialize in intensive intervention, and I'm also an advisor for the Progress Center. And one of the first barriers that really we broke through, Jenna and I, was we were with different funding streams and different bodies of work. So, Jenna's sort of this dark triangle in the middle there of students with disabilities in her work in Rhode Island. And my work in Rhode Island was that yellow and the red, building the tiered supports. And, when I build my part, kids with disabilities are in it, and I get those questions. And when she builds her part, they might not have the systems, and then she gets my questions. So the first barrier we broke was agreeing to work together so that we can truly have an integrated, seamless system. And and it wasn't set up like that initially. And then also, we really tried not to come in with a pre-planned training. We really wanted to see the problems of practice arise on their own and authentically address them as they arise. And that's what we're here to present with you today. So our objectives today is the why. We won't go deeply into that. We know you all understand the why. How did we do this? And the what resources, what tools did we produce? All to seamlessly integrate MTSS and special education. If you look at Rhode Island's state report card and you scroll district through district through district, there is not one district that are gaps between students with disabilities and all students aren't exceptionally wide. And often in the face of really strong outcomes for all kids, like even districts that are considered very impressive have really, really large gaps. And that means that it is not a child by child issue. It is not a teacher by teacher issue. It is not a school issue. It is a systems issue because every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. Therefore, we are trying to produce systems solutions. We're going to start by listening to Dr. Atul Gawande, who does systems change in another field, in medicine. And while he's speaking about medicine, I would just encourage you to think about the same themes he is saying, but think about it in education. And the reason for that is because systems change is systems change. And so when he says doctors, you think teachers. And when he says hospitals, you think schools. Please take a moment right now to listen to Dr. Gawande.
Knowing what to do is not the same as knowing how to do it. So the first question, what do you do to lower surgical deaths? Now we knew a how, use a checklist, much as they do in aviation. How do you get people to use a checklist was another puzzle. And over the years, what we found is that the combination of really needing, you can't just pay them or create a regulation that says you have to do it. You have to recognize it's a culture change and walk people hand in hand through a hospital process, a team process, where they can get everybody on board with making a very complex change, even though it seems like a simple 2-minute checklist shouldn't be so complicated.
So it's really about culture change, not just ticking off the boxes.
Yeah, and leadership. So, surgeons are used to the idea that no one tells us what to do about the way we do our operations.
Captain of the ship.
Captain of the ship, and I make the rules.
Right.
The idea that there would be a standardized way for any component of the way that we do things, the way we communicate, the way we plan, the way we work together as a team. That's what the checklist was really doing, was saying we're going to have a scripted way that we discuss what the goals of the operation are, how we were going to get it done. And that was the culture change, to go from cowboys to pit crews, where we would agree we would really be a pit crew for the patient. And that I'm finding is true across many problems in public health.
Exactly.
As we've spread our work into trying to figure out how do you make change for childbirth, or how do you make change for people's end of life care. At the beginning of life and end of life has been other projects we've gotten involved in. It's been, again, this idea that there are known ways that you can be more effective, and can we make it easy for people to adopt those known ways effectively? And if we show that it works, then you kind of got to do it. and that's a hard place to come to.
So it's a culture change from cowboys to pit crews. And it takes leadership and it takes a team process. You have to take a team through a process to have a pre-planned sort of scripted structure to how you do things together. So he talked about his solution being a checklist and walking with leadership support through a process of using the checklist in a team building process. Our parallel in education is a map. So we're going to be referring today to our map, but we want you to understand that, again, it takes leadership backing the work that we're sharing with you today. We have to walk them through a team building process. We have to start small. And then when the results show it works, then you got to do it. And that, again, that's where the leadership piece comes in. Let's get started. In MTSS, the first data point, of course, is screening, universal screening to identify risk. And all schools, actually all schools in Rhode Island that I've ever worked with have universal screening tools, some better than others, but they all have them. And often they use them just to sort the kids by colors, right? Red, high risk, intensive intervention, yellow, some risk, intervention, green, on benchmark, not having risk in foundational skills. But they rarely seem to be doing more with that. Often these tools have a developmental, so in their breakdown, their probes that make up these tools, they have a developmental progression. So this is AIMSweb. We're going to use a math example. This happens to be a first grade map because in this work, we start with a team. We pick one grade level, one area of focus. This is first grade, this is math. And we are going to pilot it at this grade level before we do anything more broadly because that's good systems change. But here you can see their tool, in addition to labeling kids red, yellow, and green on the composite, has probes that represent math skills from the most developmentally simplistic to the more complex. And so if you look at the child's performance on each of the probes, the first column or probe where the child doesn't meet benchmark is the most foundational skill that they are currently weak in. So again, first schools weren't using that information. And so we're teaching them to do that. And then we're also teaching them that each probe actually represents a targeted intervention need. For example, if the student doesn't meet benchmark, the first probe they don't meet benchmark on is math fact fluency, 1 digit, we know we need to work on computational fluency. And we're going to work on not just this, it's going to move into these other higher levels, but that this is where that child currently needs more practice and immediate corrective feedback. Whereas a student that meets benchmark in all of these, and the first one they don't meet benchmark in and concepts and application, that means that they're actually relatively high flyers as far as foundational skills. And we need to move into generalization and enrichment, really.
And this is where we lean into our first problem of practice, where we found the field working as cowboys rather than pit crews. So when we worked with the team at this first grade level, we found that students with disabilities and students that have IEPs were initially not included in the MAP planning at all. The conversation was, oh, their services are met through the special educator, so we didn't include them. And our first bet was, nope, let's put all students in the MAP and see where they fall in the continuum of math need. And the other piece is when they were included in the MAP, they put all students that have an IEP in that lowest, most intensive need grouping with the assumption, oh, they have the IEP and they have the most intensive need, but that is not the case. So as you can see on our slide, it's a depiction of how our students with IEPs were grouped together in a more heterogeneous way. So the special educator had a task of meeting all of their individualized needs in a 30-minute block in a heterogeneous group, and it just was not an effective use of their time or the resources. And even to go along with that as well, each of those groups, the other groups that were more homogeneously grouped, the educators never knew what the other one was doing. Oh, they go down the hall to math intervention. I don't know what they do there. Or, oh, they go into this other classroom with a specialist and they get support there. And there wasn't that collaboration or understanding of what one another was doing and how they were supporting all students on the continuum of math learning, which then we transferred to the PIT crew model. So we shift the system to support all students with the instruction and intervention they needed based on their present level and in the least restrictive environment. And this led to more inclusion practices where students with disabilities are being provided intervention support that met their needs and with their peers.
And that also added to their instructional time in their targeted needs. Because as Jenna said, over here, because that one special educator had to meet 3 needs, think 30 minutes divided by 3, we're talking 10 minutes per skill need, right? Whereas when they're actually homogeneously grouped with people with similar needs, now the full 30 minutes is dedicated to that need. So students are getting more quality services and instructional time. Culture change goes from, oh, I don't work with those kids, they go over to the special ed, or so-and-so got an IEP, so I no longer work with them anymore. We moved from that to all kids are in the MAP and get the supports aligned to their needs, IEP or not. So the next part of the MAP is building the cohesive instructional portion. And we used to only talk about intervention menus and tier 2 and tier 3, but what we found is people tended to forget that outcomes, be it reading, be it literacy, be it math, are a result of all instruction in that area. So that includes tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3. So in our MAP, we put all of the above because we want even the general education teacher to understand that they should know what implications this data has for them. So you can see here in the MAP tier 1. Tier 1 is listed in the green. This particular school's core curriculum was Bridges Math. We're not saying good or bad, it's just what they use. Notice that all students are receiving core instruction, right? Because unless the IEP says otherwise, that's least restrictive and we don't pull kids from core instruction. Otherwise, we're just creating new gaps. To that end, though, for the kids that are in this far left column that we know have developmental deficits, there's some things in math that they have not mastered yet. We know that the tier 1 teacher, the general educator, has to scaffold the tier 1 instruction for access. And in an IEP, we call that accommodations, but in MTSS, it's any child that the data says should need that, right? Those are scaffolds. So we list this here so that once we put kids in the MAP, the tier 1 teacher understands their role as well. For tier 2 and tier 3, you can see that here, the students with the largest math foundational skill gaps have a highly explicit and intensive double block of intervention 5 days a week. And that is because they need not only early numeracy skills, but because it's a grade 1, they also need magnitude. They also need fluency, and they're really far behind. So working on this one skill is not going to meet their needs. They need something extremely different from the general education curriculum because they had gen ed and this is what got them there. So it looks really different. If you think about the instructional hierarchy, the stages of learning, we know that for these kids, they're still in the acquisition stage of learning. So they need the most heavily explicit and heavy modeling of these skills. And we support the schools in a direct instruction program because that's the only way with like 35, 40 minutes, you are going to get all of these skills done in that time period in a schedule and do it well with fidelity. So here in the middle, you can see these kids don't require that level of explicitness. Why? Because in the instructional hierarchy, they're more here in the middle. They have the skills, they're just slow and a little bit more labored. They're a little bit less accurate, but they know the skill. So we have to give them guided practice, high opportunities to respond and feedback into independent practice. And that's what peer-assisted learning strategies in math does. And so they're getting what they need. And the students in the furthest right column who are, I call them enrichment, but they're really just meeting benchmark. They don't have foundational skill gaps. We're going to move them into word problem intervention using schema-based instruction. Why? Because their stage of learning in the instructional hierarchy is generalization. And so now all these kids need word problems, right? but these kids have more foundational skills that are needed first. So our goal will be that at each data cycle, we want to see kids moving from here into there, and that's how the map flows.
And this is where we get to problem of practice number 2. So as we started to do our work, we started to look at the specially designed instruction that students with disabilities were being provided. And we found that they lacked evidence-based. They lacked a lot of those elements that Nicole was talking about that the MTSS system was actually building for their most intensive students, the more complex learners. They lacked metacognitive strategies. The instruction was not always explicit. It definitely wasn't very systematic. It was often very discrete and single skill, not multi-component. And it was often not at their present level. It was less than the tiered intervention supports that they were getting. The students were getting often reteaching or mostly reteaching, a little bit of pre-teaching of the core instruction only. It was a support for work completion. It really lacked evidence and substance to support the student at their present level. So students with IEPs are now in the map from the onset to strengthen the individualization with the PIT crew model. So all students start with the entrance decision rules from the screener, not just that composite risk and the color, but really digging into those individual measures to see where students fall within the continuum for that grade level. Then we go to a cohesive instruction and intervention model where all students are grouped based on their instructional need. And finally, we progress monitor students based on that continuum. So if they're in our most foundational need group, while they do need all the areas and the instruction is multi-component, we will be progress monitoring them at the lowest level, but they were not at benchmark. And as Nicole alluded in the last section, as they beat those benchmarks, we move them into the next instructional grouping. And the goal is for us to move them up the continuum so that they are on that benchmark group and being provided those enrichment over time. So this is just a clear depiction of the progress monitoring and noting that these interventions often have their own mastery measure assessments within them, which that can be used somewhere in the goal of the IEP or when we go to individualization to further support students. But when we talk about monitoring, we're really talking about those scientifically validated measures that help us set an ambitious goal and show whether their specially designed instruction or their intervention is helping to close their achievement gap adequately. And that's where we lead to problem of practice number 3. So we were doing great work in the realm of MTSS around what progress monitoring is. Educators were providing scientifically validated measures, such as like a curriculum-based measure, to progress monitor students. They were setting rigorous benchmark goals. They had graph data and they were making decisions every 4 to 6 data points to really determine whether the intervention was effective, and if not, they were individualizing. And when we got into looking at the IEPs and the objectives and benchmarks and goals that they were setting, there was not clear alignment between the needs that were outlined and the goals that were set. And then the goals in Rhode Island, we're a state where you have to have short-term objectives and benchmarks for all students. And the distilling of that was even further. So they were either really very discrete, teeny tiny skills that did not transcend closing a gap for a year-long IEP, or they were unrealistic and they had all kinds of information in there, multi-component, lots of different things. It was not consistent, and it was not internally consistent as well.
So again, not all states require short-term objectives and benchmarks for all students. Rhode Island does. So if your state is one that only requires that for all assessed students, some of what we're going to describe right now is irrelevant to you. But in our state, even students that have a mild gap and they're receiving SDI for a relatively minor foundational skill gap still have to have short-term objectives and benchmarks. So in the resources for this presentation, we shared that while we're not going to do a lot with this because we're still very much building this right now, we are working with the state level leadership and directors and those in our lab schools to try to develop some guidance around how do we take our MTSS progress monitoring here on the left that meets the NDRU standard for a rigorous progress monitoring goal. How do we take this level of rigor and input it into our IEPs so that we are not creating duplicative and over assessing kids that we need to be spending more time teaching and not as much time assessing. So here you can see we're trying to work with our colleagues at the higher level to come to consensus on, if, and this is in line with what we train in MTSS, that if the child does only have a small deficit, you should be using the benchmark and the benchmark tool. And that is the strongest and most rigorous for achievement gap closing and progress monitoring. So in the face-to-face session at the CASE conference, we took a student that exists in the map. So the area we're focusing in is math. The grade was first grade. And there are kids with IEPs in that map because remember we told you we made them do it, right? So we took a kid that had an IEP and a math goal in that map. And on the left, you see their business as usual goal. How did they write their IEP? What did the short-term objectives and benchmarks look like? What did the intervention look like? And then on the right, we kind of used the map to say, okay, if I was using the map to inform the IEP, what would it look like? Using the map, it's just informed by the map. And then the activity is simply, without judgment, just compare. What are the differences? And, we will tell you that, one of the first takeaways is this child is at the intensive intervention level in foundational skills, 10th percentile. The business as usual IEP had a goal focusing on word problems. Go back to our map. The child was here in the map. The business as usual goal was here. Our goal in the mock, informed by the map, was here. So one of the first takeaways was it certainly seems like the goal was more realistically written and likely to do more closing of the achievement gap.
Additionally, there was just more refined information around the child's present level. There was data that was included, the universal screening data, and comparing the students to the benchmarks. And the specially designed instruction was really more refined. Originally, they described the specially designed instruction a lot of areas and a lot of things, and it was really more honed in and focused on the student's present level and how they were going to get there.
And the progress monitoring, short-term objectives and benchmarks were drafted using the resource that we put together.
If I could just add a little bit to that as well, that was an area that folks had noticed in the short-term objectives and benchmarks. There was skills all over the place. It was like a kitchen sink of skills. And there was no clear through line on how they would make progress in all of those areas for the student. So in the mock one that we used with the map, it was very clear of what the end of the year goal and what each of the interim benchmarks would be for the student, and there could be a true trajectory to show whether they were making progress or not.
And not surprisingly, as we were doing this activity, people started talking about, well, the problem is, we only have one math interventionist, and people will say, well, the students with IEPs can't receive that because then they're kind of double dipping. They're getting more resources than other kids. We don't have enough resources. So part of what the MAP training does for this team, again, we're leading a team-based process, is to say, throw out your old ideas of what your roles are. First, you sort all kids in the map per the entrance decision rules and multiple gates. Put the kids in. You're going to find some columns don't have kids. You're going to, so then once the kids shake out, then you think about all the adults you have at that grade level during intervention time. All hands on deck. Remember, we're a pit crew, right? So here at this particular first grade level, they have special educator, they have a general educator, and a math interventionist. Other schools, these might all be gen ed and special ed. Another school, this might be a para, a special ed, and gen ed. The point being, it's all hands on deck. And then you put people with where their strengths are. So this column that's most foundational need is often, not always, often, many of the kids have IEPs, like say 5 out of 6. It's frequent. So Mrs. Jones here might say, it makes sense for me to take this group. I'm the most knowledgeable about specially designed instruction. I have these kids, I know their families, and we handed her a quality, content-rich intervention. It's not perfect, no intervention is, but she's not having to be a math expert. She's needing to follow a highly systematic and explicit intervention, and then she's going to use her skill set for data-based individualization if these highly complex kids need more. The gen ed teacher and the gen ed teacher, this one right here, and the math specialist are going to do the tier 2 intervention, PALS, peer assisted learning strategies. It's relatively easy. There is a manual, so they're going to feel good because they know that they don't have to plan a brand new prep from scratch. They have the resources they need, and those resources target fluency. And by the way, PALS is like three days a week, 20, 30 minutes. So there's still time to do some core support with the high quality core curriculum as well, because we planned the map carefully. Now, this math teacher is going to take the enrichment group, which is working on word problems. Everybody knows their role, all hands on deck. We are a pit crew to cohesively meet the needs of all students in the least restrictive environment, and everybody knows what everybody's doing, including how to progress monitor. So we're making the culture change from improving math outcomes for students with IEPs is the special educator's job to improving math outcomes for students with IEPs is everyone's job. What is my role? One of the challenges to saying all hands on deck is, I wasn't trained. I don't know how to do that. You have to provide me training. Well, now we've moved into the what? Like, what are the resources we use to do this? In Rhode Island, we use some of our federal and state funds to produce a free online learning platform for educators. We use it in our blended model. It's called BridgeRI, and it stands for Bridging Research, Implementation, and Data to Guide Educators in Rhode Island. The website is www.mtssri.org. So BridgeRI has all the training we needed and our schools need to implement this map. So let's say that tier 1 teacher, you can see here I have a visual from the map, right? Let's say that tier 1 teacher or those who evaluate and support the tier 1 teacher, such as principals, coaches, department chairs, even a para or a co-teacher if it's special ed. Let's say they say, I don't know how to scaffold. Well, BridgeRI has resources to support you in that. For example, we have a training on supporting all learners in math, universal design, differentiated instruction, and scaffolding. We also have supporting language development in math, which of course is a language scaffold, which is great for English language learners as well, differently abled students and multilingual learners. So we've got the resources needed to help tier 1 do their job. Quick reminder, not to get on a soapbox about this, but BridgeRI was not designed to send the gen ed teacher there by themselves and say, volunteer them to do this and move on. It was meant to be used in a professional learning community with educators doing a portion of the course, coming together, debriefing, implementing parts in their classroom, and then doing the next portion of the course in cycles of inquiry. So please use it in the manner of which it was intended. For the tier 2, right, here's the tier 2 of the map. We have an intensive intervention in the pink. We have a more mild moderate intervention in the yellow, and then enrichment in the far right. If these folks, whoever they might be, because remember, intervention's all hands on deck, so it's not just a math specialist. Whoever they are, they can get their training here on BridgeRI. We have math peer assisted learning strategies, PALS training on BridgeRI, and the manual is very inexpensive, and that there's a reason we built that. We also have the Pirate Math word problem intervention for all levels, as you see here. We even have early numeracy for preschool and K, and coming soon is fraction face-off. The only reason we do not have connected math concepts, our intensive intervention, is because it's proprietary and because it's so highly manualized. It's easy for us as TA providers to support schools. Finally, for tier 3, the team that led the building of the map is often your child-by-child team members. It must have representation from behavior, such as related service providers, math interventionists, usually or a gen ed teacher, and special education on it. And they're going to learn how to build the map as well as the very deep understanding of things like progress monitoring using Bridge RI's Tier 3 courses as laid out here in this slide.
So we're going to go through an example of a student named Olivia. She was previously receiving Tier 3 intervention support and per the map on the previous slide. She was making progress, but not enough to close the gap. And after several rounds of data-based individualization, she was found to have a specific learning disability, which qualified for an IEP. We're going to show you how the development of Olivia's IEP was really enhanced by leveraging the system that was built through the MTSS and the MAP. So included in Olivia's present levels was the school's universal screener, which we already said was AIMSweb. She was consistently scoring below the 10th percentile, which is in the intensive intervention area. And her scores indicated she was not at benchmark at those foundational areas, quantity total and difference fluency, which are below grade measures. So really highlighting here that no longer was just about that composite in intensive intervention need. It was really, one, talking about the national norm, 10th percentile compared to typical peers, but also that breakdown of those individual measures and where Olivia was on that continuum. The progression is built, and this was a guide to really help the special educators understand really what is Olivia's present level.
And because this is a more restrictive setting, right, to have a Tier 3 intervention tends to be highly restrictive. It's different from core curriculum because it's more restrictive. You can see here that there's a second gate, which is the Connecting Math Concepts Placement Test. That is a diagnostic that tells you exactly where in the intervention to work with Olivia. And again, that's just us making a multiple gated process so that we don't put a child in a more restrictive intervention, because remember, she's still getting core, without being sure that we had multiple data points that indicated that need.
So now that we know and we're clear on what Olivia's present level, we want to develop a goal that is aligned to that present level. So the goal is obviously for Olivia to progress in grade level math skills. And to do that, she needs multiple foundational skills that are explicitly and systematically taught to her to address those skills. In addition to those Tier 1 scaffolds to prevent new gaps, which is going to be noted in her accommodations. We just put it here in the goal to outline it as well. So going to the map, the clear roles. So those accommodations and scaffolds, and she will be provided a multi-component, specially designed instruction that is explicit and systematic and includes all of the areas, the foundational areas, with a heavy emphasis on those early foundation ones that she is low at.
And see here how the roles are clear. The gen ed teacher is doing the scaffolding. Now, maybe the special educator might need to support them. There's a training on Bridge. Remember, we told you that. So if the educator is not sure how to do that, then that's their plan for their school year professional development. And Mrs. Jones, the special educator, is going to do the intervention in this case. And a lot of folks were interested in the scaffolding resource. General education teachers have rarely been taught how to scaffold. And this is also an important visual here to depict why using accommodations is not cheating. So let's say the scaffold that Olivia needs right now to be able to access core instruction and not have new gaps is to use a calculator or a multiplication table. Actually, it was addition and subtraction, wasn't it? But to use a tool like that. Sometimes, especially in secondary schools, educators, gen ed teachers will think that's like cheating, and the state test doesn't allow that. The reason we're letting Olivia use those scaffolds in Tier 1 is so that she can benefit from the higher level learning, the rigorous learning in Tier 1, while removing her barrier, which is those foundational math skills, while, see the pink? We're fixing the foundational math deficits. So it's only a short-term scaffold until we can get this intervention to fill those gaps. And once you explain it in that way, a lot of times the general education educator, I'm thinking more like secondary, they understand it more clearly because they can see how the parts fit together.
So then we move into how are we going to measure progress for Olivia? She's going to be measured in a small group weekly using progress monitoring probes, which is the quantity difference fluency with the goal of 77 points based on the benchmark. That is the goal for the end of that measure once a month. She will also be administered using NCF with a goal set for the end of the year, the 30th percentile, because we want to see how she is generalizing her skill to that measure as well. We have strong validated measures to monitor her progress in her IEP goals. We're talking about access to the grade level instruction and how her specially designed instruction is going to support through that generalization to ensure that we're promoting ambitious progress in lieu of Olivia's circumstances. So alignment within the MTSS system. Parts of the map can help inform parts of the IEP. We're not saying everything, but it really helps to make more internally consistent and rigorous and IEPs that promote progress for this student. We anchor it back into the system, and we're using tools and assessments that are already exist and leveraging them to then build upon them further. We measure that progress. We monitor it very closely to determine whether that specially designed instruction was effective for Olivia or not, showing her progress. Parents love these reports to really understand what does it mean. If 4 or more data points are below the goal line, we engage in the DBI or database individualization process, which is a whole nother session, just as we did in the tier 3 to continually support the refinement of Olivia's individualized education program. So we use the DBI process to try to intensify supports. And when something's working, then we refine and we adapt, whether that be an accommodation, a modification, an addition, or an intensification in a functional goal maybe, or we add an element to Olivia's specially designed instruction for math.
One of the things we noticed in our problems of practice too is that, remember how all the kids with IEPs got clumped together during math with the special educator? But their needs weren't the same, right? So not every child with an IEP is going to be in the column that Olivia was in. Meet Henry. Henry's needs are different, right? And so had Henry, who we see here, been informed his IEP, if his IEP had been informed by the map, we could see that his present level would say he's on benchmark level, grade level probes. He may have some needs, but they're very mild. It doesn't seem like accommodations in tier 1 are needed, and that's important. We don't want to over accommodate, right? Sometimes we do that in special ed. Our desire to help kids, we do too much and then they're not independent. Also, his intervention can be met in a tier 2 general education intervention. He does not require specially designed instruction in math. So in the old way, he would have been with the gen ed teacher. With the special ed teacher, and he likely would not have been in his least restrictive environment, and he would have been missing higher level learning. So while we're still progress monitoring per MTSS is just best practice on Henry, it does not need to be tracked in his IEP. So again, do not think of the map as a tool to stop the individualization of the IEP. In fact, we're finding it helps schools to be more individualized while still keeping the internal consistency of the IEP process. So MTSS is no longer general education is separate from special education. Instead, now it is seamlessly integrated. MTSS strengthens special education strengthens MTSS. It is a synergistic relationship. This we are truly living, we are truly building. And as Jenna and I in our work continue to hit these problems of practice, we will continue to produce, with the help of the educators we work with, solutions that are realistic and authentic in real schools. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.